the Labour MP and former Marine Fred Thomas. And if you think that's just Marr droning on, well, I'll be talking as well about the extraordinary drone successes of Ukraine, as well as a blistering review of maternity services in England. And we'll hear about a revolt of female Labour MPs with a strong message for the Prime Minister in waiting, Andy Burnham. An LBC exclusive coming as well. Join me after the news.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, government departments have had to accept a 1% cut in their budgets to pay for an increase in defence spending. The Prime Minister has promised an extra £15 billion over the next 4 years. It will see some older weapons and kit phased out in favour of drones. Sir Keir Starmer says the boost in funding comes with caveats.
In the past, defence spending has sometimes been seen as a bottomless pit. People see the money going in, but they don't feel the benefits. So this time must be different. We can't just spend more, we've got to spend better.
Donald Trump says a decision by the US Supreme Court to block his efforts to limit birthright citizenship is too bad. The president says he will get round it in Congress through legislation. There are growing calls for a public inquiry following criticism of a review into maternity care in England. Families whose children died or were harmed say it doesn't go far enough. And Katie Boulter's among more than a dozen British players who've now bowed out at Wimbledon in the first round. There has been some success. Katie Swan and Arthur Ferry have booked their place in round 2. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 12 points at 10,497. The pound buys $1.32 and €1.16. LBC weather tonight, most places turning dry with clear spells. Cloudier with a little drizzle in the west, lows of 11. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Let me put this baldly. These are dangerous times, and as a country, we are living an untruth. We've promised our NATO allies to get defence spending up to 5% of GDP by 2035. Today, with the Defence Investment Plan, the government has laid out our national pathway, and it doesn't reach that. By 2030, when NATO thinks we may be attacked by Russia, we'll be at just 2.4%. NATO ranks its members in a league table about how they're doing in meeting their promises. We are 31 out of 32, lurking right at the bottom. It's no wonder that around the world, allies are asking whether the UK can any longer be trusted. Today's media is full of overexcited stuff about new drone fleets and funky naval vessels and autonomous wingmen for new fighter jets. Well, I would strongly advise you not to be distracted by any of it, because in key areas, the money to buy it simply isn't there. Not in the short term, not in the long term. Today, you haven't seen, standing alongside Keir Starmer as he talks about standing up against bullies and a huge historic shift for the nation, the chiefs of the defence staff nodding their agreement and clapping him. There's a reason for that. They know the truth. Indeed, I'm told that a sentence expressing their support, which was going to be in a speech by the Defence Secretary Dan Jarvis in the Commons this afternoon, was removed at the last minute at the insistence of the military high command. Yes, no doubt, some difficult decisions have been taken by the politicians just to get the defence spend up to the extra £15 billion in the next 4 years, about half of what is needed. But behind the headlines, the harder job of actually honouring our NATO promises and properly protecting this country has been abruptly dropped in the lap of Andy Burnham and whoever he chooses as his next Chancellor. Well, that is the job of leadership. He asked for it, but it will mean challenging the way the Treasury thinks. It'll mean telling voters hard truths. It'll mean very uncomfortable choices. Is our Prime Minister in waiting up for all of this? I very much hope so, because one way or another, not just the safety, but also now the credibility of this country are at stake. Now, a little earlier, I was joined in the studio by the Defence Secretary, Dan Jarvis. Secretary of State, welcome to the studio. Is it true that the chiefs of the Defence Staff asked you to remove a sentence from your speech saying that they supported the DIP?
Nobody asked me to remove anything, and I think you'll understand that I'm not involved with the kind of minutiae of the drafting of a document, but I've worked very closely with the Chief of the Defence Staff and with the chiefs. They all welcome the publication of the Defence Investment Plan. They
don't back the numbers, do they?
I don't think that's right. I've worked very closely since being appointed every single day with the Chief of the Defence Staff, worked very closely with the chiefs. They've had a really, really important input into this process. I know that they welcome the publication of the DIP today. I think they've all now released their own statements in support of this plan. It's been a collaborative process, and in the short time I've had available to me, we've made great strides. I'm really proud, actually, of the progress we've made over the past 2 weeks, and I'm really grateful to the chiefs, not only for their service, but for the support they provided over the past couple of weeks or so.
You inherited a really serious problem. I do understand that. But still, the money isn't there. We're nothing like got enough money for 5% by 2035. And as your predecessor said, it's 2.7% by 2030, when NATO expects we might be in a war with Russia. And that is simply not enough.
Well, the £15 billion of new investment that we've announced today,
compared to the 28 billion the army say they need.
But Andrew, if you look at the wider spending context, we've made a commitment today to spend 298 billion in defence over the past 4 years, over the next 4 years. These are historically high levels of funding, and we've seen an increase of 27% in real terms. So this is a very significant investment in the defence of our nation. Is there going to be a requirement to spend more on defence? Yes, there is. But is this a major step in the right direction? Absolutely it is.
Now, you said, I think, that the next spending review is going to have to put defence as number one, which means, in a sense, this problem is being thrust at Andy Burnham and whoever becomes his Chancellor.
I don't accept that. We've put forward today a plan that has £15 billion of investment in it that will create 60,000 jobs across the UK, and will provide assurances to our allies that we are going to make the commitments, or meet the commitments that we've made previously, about achieving 3.5% of GDP on defence spending by 2035. This is a really big positive step in the right direction. Is there more to do in the future? Of course there is, but this will create 60,000 jobs, and as I say, it sits as part of a wider commitment to spend 298 billion.
Well, as you know, NATO ranks all of its members as to how they're doing on their promises of spending more in defence, and at the moment we are running 31 out of 32. We
are the third biggest spender.
That's a different question. It's a question of whether we're actually going to meet our commitments.
I've just come back from the NATO Defence Secretaries Conference in Brussels. I'll be going to Ankara with the Prime Minister next week. NATO looks to us for our leadership. That is leadership that we provided previously and will continue to provide in the future. The feedback that I've had today from allies, my counterparts from a range of different nations, is very positive about the contribution that we've made today.
Are you happy that we're 31 out of 32?
Well, I'm happy that we are a leading member of NATO, playing a leading role in terms of shaping policy of NATO. We're the third largest spender behind the United States and Germany. We have a record of committing to defence spending that we should be proud of. But yes, there's more to do. But the right place to make that further spending commitment is in the context of the next spending review. We've made good progress today, though.
One of the issues around this has been the Treasury being very, very reluctant to find new ways to raise money for defence, including some kind of war or defence bond, as we used to do in the Second World War and other countries are doing right now. Now, you and others have said that you're open to that kind of thing. Do you think we need a little bit more imagination, a little bit more radicalism, a little bit more lateral thinking from the Treasury might get us out of this trouble?
Well, firstly, let me say I've had really constructive and productive meetings with the Chancellor over the past couple of weeks, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to get additional resource to fund this investment plan that we published today. You know, I think I've got quite a hard job to do as the Defence Secretary, given the world that we're living in. But the Chancellor has a very difficult job to do as well. She has to be able to provide the resource.
War bonds, is she?
Well, I think that she understandably makes the point about the importance of sustainable funding for defence. If we want to be credible about the commitments that we make, and we do, we need to be clear about the way in which we're going to fund the commitments that we make. That was not the case under the previous government. It is the case under this government.
But the Germans, for instance, have found new ways to fund a big increase in defence. Why can't we?
I think we are seeking to look innovatively about whether there are other mechanisms to provide support for our defence expenditure. Of course, we want to keep that under review and look at what our allies are doing. But I think the most important point is, in the end, if you're making commitments to invest in our defence infrastructure, our capabilities, and in our people, you've got to be clear about how you're going to pay for those particular commitments, and we have been clear.
We're talking now in a very strange political atmosphere, a kind of hiatus between the Starmer years and almost certainly the Burnham years. Have you had any conversations with Andy Burnham about this?
So Andy Burnham is someone that I know very well because we both served together as Metro mayors. I know that he understands the huge importance of securing the nation, the importance of defence, the importance of our national security. All Labour Prime Ministers understand the importance of making sure that you've got the right resource and the right capabilities. That, over the past 2 weeks, is what I've been drawing together. More money, sharper capabilities, and a clear commitment to meet the 3.5% target that we'd identified previously. I have absolutely no doubt that the next Prime Minister, no doubt it will likely be, of course, Andy Burnham, that he will honour those commitments, and he understands the importance of defending our nation.
And when you say that, have you spoken to him?
Well, I'm not going to get into sort of private conversations, but of course I'm talking to Andy and his team of people as they prepare for what the Prime Minister this morning described as being an orderly transition. Of course he understands the importance of defence. Of course he understands the importance of making sure we've got the right resource and the right capabilities. And in the 2 weeks that I've had as the Defence Secretary, I've worked night and day to make sure that we can publish the best possible plan. It will generate 60,000 jobs, 298 billion of expenditure. I think that's not bad going for 2 weeks.
It is only 2 weeks, and you took over, of course, because of the drama of John Healey, one of the most loyal Labour ministers I've come across, resigning because he thought this was just an impossible position. Did you make any demands or requirements of the Prime Minister before taking over the job?
Well, the commitment that I made was to do right by defence and do right by the people who serve in our armed forces.
So did you say to Keir Starmer, this might mean more money?
The Prime Minister wouldn't have appointed me other than for the fact that he knew that I would fight for more defence spending. That is what I have done. That is what I've secured. That is what I will continue to do. I will want to do right by defence, right by armed forces. We've made good progress in terms of doing that in the past 2 weeks, both in terms of the quantum of the resource and in terms of the capabilities. There's more to do, though, and I'm determined to do it.
It must have been a heck of a 2 weeks. Are you keen to stay on as Defence Secretary?
It's a huge honour and a privilege to serve in defence. It feels to me like I've come home, but ultimately be for the next Prime Minister to choose the members of his cabinet.
All right, Dan Jarvis, thanks very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
Admiral Lord West is a former First Sea Lord and was Chief of the Naval Staff during the Blair years, and he's with me now. Lord West, thanks for coming in. Is it really true, do you think, that the senior people in the armed forces back this defence investment plan?
I would be extremely surprised if deep down they do, but they're, of course, loyal. And when you're in your post as a First Sea Lord or a Chief of the Air Staff, you're working for the government and you have to say sometimes what you have to say, even though it goes against the grain. The reason this has taken so long, this plan, is because they could not get this sorted out. And I think it's rather sad that after that huge gestation period, it still isn't right. And it's clear that it's not going to be sorted out until the next Parliament, actually.
Where, in your view, are the big gaps?
I think, first of all, there's the financial one. We made big promises to NATO. We said we'd go to 3.5% by 2035, with 1.5% doing resilience and things, intelligence and all that sort of stuff. Quite clearly, at the moment, there's no plans to get anywhere near it. We said we'd be at 3% by 2030. It's quite clear we're going to be at 2.7%, so there's no plan to get that. I think that the NATO governments will look at us and say, my God, the Brits always used to be the most powerful of the European NATO countries. They always provided the weaponry required. And I mean, speaking just as a naval officer, they relied on us in the European side to look after the Atlantic. Yes, they had a few ships, but actually the UK did it. That has all changed.
Do you think this damages our credibility?
I think it damages our credibility, certainly with NATO. And of course, sitting on the wings there is dear old Trump, Whatever one wants to think of him, and he's going to be watching this very closely. And the Americans, let's face it, we cannot rely on them in the way we used to.
Looking particularly at the Navy, that was your old service. There were going to be lots of new destroyers and frigates coming down the horizon. They don't seem to be coming now, and we seem to have some new ships which will be in charge of drone operations. I don't quite understand. Do you understand what the shape of the Navy, according to this, is going to be?
It's not really clear, but I have no difficulty with going down the route of having command ships controlling lots of drones. I think there's a long way to go till submarine drones and surface water drones and things can be handled en masse in the North Atlantic in a gale force 10. I think there's a very long way to go. But I don't instinctively have something against that looking to the future. But this is a diversion from where the real problem is. This is talking about something in 10 years' time. If you look back 10 years ago, just think what has happened in the world. And they're talking about providing capital expenditure for something that's not even designed yet. They haven't worked it through in 10 years' time. Where we need money is now up front, because we need to ensure that our destroyers, for example, the Type 45 is a very good ship. Only one of them has been getting out. It took 2 weeks to get one to Cyprus because there's not been sufficient maintenance, spare gear. We need to get them operational. We need them to have upgraded weapon systems. Similarly with our nuclear attack submarines, highly capable, hugely expensive, and they haven't been going to sea. We've got to make sure we spend the money on maintenance. We've got to spend the money on exercising. And of course, in the frigate force, dear old frigates, because it's taken so long to order frigates, they're all falling apart. And we're going to have an even worse gap. We will have almost no ships. When the war started in the Gulf...
Let me just stop you there. Almost no ships. For how long?
Well, that's going to be... In 2027, the first of the 26s should start coming off the production line. And I think then about one every 2 years there'll be another one. That's hardly speedy. And the first of the Type 31s, which are a rather cheaper frigate, will. But what the government should be having in place is not saying we've got an order of 6 of these, and the Norwegians have got some as well, from us. But they should be saying we want a rolling programme of shipbuilding. That might morph into different type as we go on, but getting rid of all your hard steel and ships that you can guarantee to go all around the world, I think is extremely dangerous.
Andy Burnham talked a lot in his speech at the beginning of the week about reindustrialisation. Is this the kind of project that he should be focusing on?
I think it is. I think there is a real option. I know they mentioned it in here, and they mentioned it before, that in defence that one can get a lot of defence jobs, and they're all high-tech. They're well-paid, high-tech jobs. We are actually good at them if we put our money where our mouth is. I'm involved with a firm that's making radio-controlled and unmanned boats. The Americans have just brought 1,000 of them. So we can do some really good things.
And this leads me to the other big question that people always talk about, which is procurement and the MOD's notorious failure to do it very well. The Ukrainians are building massive numbers of drones with small companies to base in garages and back lots and so forth. Are we going to have to think totally differently about the way we procure defence?
I think we absolutely will. And if you think back to the Second World War, little tiny companies, cabinet makers, people making furniture, were suddenly making Mosquito aircraft and this sort of thing. And I think we need to think in that way. When you're fighting and it looks as though there might be a fight, you have to think very, very differently. Otherwise, you'll have sort of unpleasant Russian, Chechen guys walking down the high street, raping and shooting people, and then welfare and National Health Service actually count as nothing.
And the new roundabout, exactly so. Dangerous times. Lord West, thank you very, very much indeed for coming in and talking to me.
Thank you.
Coming up, could Putin's confidence about victory in Ukraine be wavering? You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time now is 6:18.
LBC.
But is a losing Putin even more dangerous? Let's talk now to Mykola Bielskov, the co-host of the Ukraine-Russia War Talk podcast. Thanks very much indeed for joining me. First of all, what's your sense from inside Ukraine about the level of recent successful drone attacks? Is this a sort of a moment when the war is clearly changing direction?
What at least we can say right now is the situation stopped to deteriorate for Ukraine. So people talk about like turning the tide, like Ukraine's is an initiative. I think it's a little bit premature, but what is certain is that Russian military strategy as we know it is not delivering result on a pace and tempo as it was in 2024, 2025. And right now it's not only about battlefield, it's the scenes you mentioned that for the first time in Russian modern military history, its vastness work against Russia, because European part of Russia is under constant attacks, their economic centers, their centers where like most of the people are concentrated. Basically, we try to undermine their war machine. So we are doing our best, but again, the ability to judge that we attained our goal would be bringing Putin to the conclusion that keeping with this futile war is senseless and he needs to negotiate, so it's still work in progress.
Mr. Bielskov, I've been looking at the statistics, and Ukraine is now launching far more drones against Russia than Russia seems to be able to launch against Ukraine. Do you think the Russian sort of military-industrial complex, to use the old phrase, is beginning to come apart?
They have some problems in terms of increasing production of specific weaponry types, but it's more about leveling the playing field. Because for some time, since 2022 till the end of 2025, Russia enjoyed asymmetric advantage. So they can target Ukraine in these combined attacks using UAVs, ballistic and cruise missiles. They attempted to undermine this like rare functioning while Ukraine was constrained. So right now it's more about leveling the playing field. Plus we still disadvantaged in terms of the classic munitions. I mean, ballistic and cruise missiles, we are doing our best, but it's mostly about parity in one-way attack and decoy UAV.
And let me ask you about Crimea, because we're getting more and more evidence that trying to get fuel supplies in and out of Crimea, trying to get people in and out of Crimea is getting harder and harder for the Russians. Do you think you're beginning to throttle the Russian occupation of Crimea?
We are doing a kind of a military experiment that is unprecedented in military history, because usually it's first laying conditions for some advances, like undermining a war machine from the rear and then advancing to liberate territories. Since Ukraine is constrained in terms of the manpower, we can do counterattacks but not offensives. It means that we'll see to what extent only this long-range attacks would prove instrumental in terms of delivering the result of like turning Russian position untenable. We now have another air alert. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, we've heard the first public admission from Putin that things are not going well. There are problems, in his words. Do you think a Putin who feels that he's losing is going to be more dangerous than Putin was even before?
First of all, it's classic Putin when he admits some problems, but not the depths of the problem. And second, we have a problem because Putin reads situation differently. Despite the fact that on the battlefield situation is not as favorable, they're not advancing as quickly as they did, it doesn't mean that his strategic reading of the situation changed in Ukrainian favor. He still thinks that like in next year, if he just keep fighting, something would change in Russian favor. For instance, some like populist government would be elected in Europe, and Ukraine's support long term would be undermined, and thus Ukrainian position would be undermined. So that's the major challenge for Ukraine and the partners, how to translate this battlefield success, the strategic strikes, problems with the Shadow Fleet into his readiness to negotiate without any preconditions. Yes, Putin can escalate, but he doesn't have any safe option, risk-free option. So he can mobilize more people, but again, it's risky. He can do unconventional escalation using nukes, in other words, but it's also risky. He can broaden the scope of aggression and affect Baltic states. It's also risky. So he doesn't have any safe free option, while it is obvious that zero battlefield strategy, as we've seen before, is not delivering as it was delivering.
Absolutely fascinating. None of us thought when this invasion started we'd be here now. Thank you very much indeed. A national review into maternity services in England tells us a story of fragmentation, lack of rules and racism as well. We need more operating theatres for women having caesarean sections, and candidly, we need to listen to women more as well. I was joined a little earlier by the author of that review, Baroness Valerie Amos. She said that she's shocked and surprised by the situation. I asked, by what exactly?
I was shocked and surprised because there have been so many reviews, investigations. We have been told about these issues and challenges time and time again. And I was shocked and surprised that it was still going on at the level and depth that it is. We have had recommendation after recommendation. Indeed, one of the things that we did as part of our investigation was to do a review of those previous recommendations. There are over 700 of them. They're overlapping.
And this is the first national review for all of England, however, is that right?
This is the first national review for all of England. So it was not just looking at a trust or a couple of trusts and doing case reviews. This was doing a national review looking at the systems. What is the underpinning that is leading to these problems?
I'm going to ask a very straightforward question here, which is that lots and lots of women have been let down by the NHS maternity services. Why and how?
They've been let down for a number of reasons. One is that women's views have been dismissed, their concerns have not been taken seriously. When they talk about the changes that they are experiencing in their bodies, which they are worried about, those concerns are dismissed. So I think that kind of what is called medical misogyny, which relates partly to just some of the attitudes to women in our society. And that's a hard thing to say.
It's not just a few male doctors.
No, it's a structural, cultural thing. In the same way that you have racism and discrimination that is both interpersonal and structural, you have the same thing with medical misogyny, where, women are asking for pain relief and they're told,
you don't need it.
You don't need it. I mean, how do you know I don't need it? You don't know what I'm experiencing. So that is an important underpinning of all of this. Then added to this are other things that have happened, which is that over time we have cultures which have grown up in our trusts, which have become incredibly defensive, where when something goes wrong, somebody going in and talking to a woman and family about what went wrong doesn't happen. Families talk about it taking years to get an apology.
So poor communication is really what you're talking about.
It's not just about poor communication. It is also about lack of accountability. I mean, there is serious lack of accountability here, which needs to be addressed. There are two things I think are important, and they're kind of linked, but, separate faces. One is that how you encourage a culture where you learn from your mistakes. Now, you can't do that if you're working in a culture of blame. But the other side of it is that if there is transgressive behaviour and there is, bullying, harassment and so on, it needs to be dealt with. People need to see that there are things that you just do not stand for, and they need to be addressed.
Now, your recommendations include things like more theatre capacity, because there are more and more people having elective caesareans, and also much more working at the weekend. What are the other practical outcomes of this?
So those two things are incredibly important because we're planning incredibly badly. We have a very high caesarean rate in this country. If you have a high caesarean rate, it means that you have more women who need to go into theatres. It means that those where there is planned caesareans get pushed to the back of the queue.
I was going to ask, why do you think we have such a high rate of caesareans?
Again, as an investigation team, we tried to get to the bottom of this because, again, you have a duality going on. Because there is a concern that there is a push towards vaginal birth, and on the other hand, there is a concern that we have way too much in terms of medical intervention. What we agreed as an investigation group was that the important thing was for women to have informed choice and for the choices that women are making to be safe choices, for them to be given the right information to help them. And the caesarean rate varies between different parts of the country as well.
As you probably know, Don Ockenden, who did that big report into Nottingham
yes.
and is a midwife herself, has been critical, saying she hasn't really learned anything else from this report and nothing is going to change as a result. What would you say to her back?
I think there are a couple of things here. One is that the issues, yes, we have known about the issues for a very long time, but this is the first time where we have taken this systems approach. And that's where I think it will be different.
Can I ask a very straightforward question?
Well, can I just finish on why it will be different? Because we spoke to so many people, we had our calls for evidence and so on. So we have 8 recommendations which are about transforming the system, about setting national standards, about greater accountability. There is also the task force which has been set up, whose job it is to take the recommendations from my investigation, those from Donna's and others, and to come up with an action plan. And the Secretary of State has said by December, which then will be monitored and overseen by the task force. So that, I think, is very different.
Final simple question. Are you yourself convinced that as a result of this, the experience of women giving birth in NHS hospitals in England will be considerably better in the future?
Well, it will if the recommendations are implemented and if they are implemented in full and if we stick to the timetable to really drive the change that is required. But if we cherry pick, throw things into the long grass, it will not happen.
Baroness Amos, Valerie Amos, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Up next, the women of the Parliamentary Labour Party have sent a strong message to the Prime Minister in waiting, Andy Burnham. Find out what it is next, but the time now 6:33, and here's Amelia Cox with your news headlines.
The Defence Secretary has told LBC he has been speaking to Andy Burnham and he understands the importance of defence spending. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, Dan Jarvis has insisted both NATO allies and military chiefs are happy with today's increase in investment. The Supreme Court has ruled against Donald Trump's executive order to limit birthright citizenship in the US. The president wanted to stop babies born to illegal and temporary migrants in the States being given automatic American citizenship. And a maternity commissioner will be introduced in England to oversee changes to NHS maternity care following a major review. But campaigners say it doesn't go far enough and have stepped up calls for a public inquiry. LBC weather tonight, most places turning dry with clear spells, cloudier with a little drizzle in the west, lows of 11 degrees.
This is LBC.
One of which being that 50% of his ministers are women. They've also asked that 50% of his number 10 team are women, that his deputy prime minister is a woman, and also that he makes a first minister of state for women who attends cabinet. Now, the background to all of this is for quite a while, women within the Labour Party have felt like there is a boys' club within the party, specifically within Keir Starmer's administration. Now, we should note that the Labour Party have never elected a female leader. There was some discussion, I understand, as to who could potentially stand in a contest. However, now it's pretty clear that there isn't going to be one. So this is how the Women's Parliamentary Labour Party are trying to kind of make a mark and make it better for all of them.
Very interesting. And we had Polly Billington on the show, who's vice chair, of course, of the PLP. And I asked her yesterday about David Miliband perhaps coming back, and she gave us a very, very feisty answer.
She did. And speaking, within this letter, there was a lot of criticism, as I said, towards Keir Starmer and his administration. There is a line in the letter that says female MPs, quote, fought very hard to achieve electoral success, only to find that we're battling with our own party to be heard as women. However, whilst there was this criticism towards Starmer, Andy Burnham in the briefing around him hasn't been spared. As you said, Polly Billington was asked about what would happen if Ed and David Miliband were back, and she wasn't too thrilled.
Well, do you know what? I don't really need to be organising or advocating for a reunion of the demonised football club from the mid-1990s, right? I don't do the same things as I did in the middle of the 1990s, and I don't think that the boys need to either. We need less lads, and more diversity. The world has moved on significantly from the mid-1990s.
Absolutely. Pretty clear what she thought, Bethany. Thank you very, very much indeed for that. Let's hear now from one of the most prominent women on the Labour benches, Jess Phillips, the MP for Birmingham Yardley and former Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls. Jess, it is very, very clear that Andy Burnham is not a woman. I say that because there's a very strange briefing from somebody saying that he was the first female Prime Minister.
Someone said that he was the first female Prime Minister. Some man said that he was the first. I don't know who it was, but it sounded like a very stupid man said something very stupid.
Have you any idea what the basis of that was?
I think it is because Andy Burnham has a huge number of women around him, and this person was an idiot and thought that, which is absolutely true. The absolute power that sits behind Andy Burnham is Louise Haigh, Annalise Midgley. I mean, he's very close to Lucy Powell. So, there's no doubt about it that he is surrounded by women. And it was sort of the suggestion was that
therefore
because he'd met some women, he was a woman. I'm sure you don't think he's ever had a period.
But he was challenged about this by the Women's PLP, and he said he'd kick out anybody who made that kind of briefing on his part.
To be fair, he wasn't necessarily. He said it before he was challenged on it. He referred to the briefing as being stupid and said it didn't come from him. He has no idea. And often, a source close to Andy Burnham doesn't turn out to be a source close to anyone. He said he very explicitly said that the kind of briefing that he has witnessed, and as an outsider as well, he's got to see it from the point of view of people being briefed against that had gone on, that had seemed quite sexist, that anyone he found that was doing that would be out on their ear in his administration. He did say that very clearly.
He's in the middle, obviously, as I was suggesting just now, in being lobbied by all sorts for jobs in this new government. There are going to be disappointed people, for sure. But do you think this kind of initiative by the Women's PLP is going to produce a different kind of cabinet?
Look, I think that Labour leaders certainly, even when we were in opposition, there was there always has been a bit of a commitment to at least 50% of the jobs being women. It's absolutely in the blood of the Labour Party, like it is in our constituency Labour parties. You have to have 50% women on your executive. So it is. That's not particularly new news. I think that what was certainly got across by many women in the room today to Andy Burnham is that it isn't just about having women in the room. It is the ability for you to listen to them, give them power, and listen when they speak. Giving someone a job is not it, and then just ignoring them when they speak will not work. And he definitely got that message from the women in the PLP today.
It's very like what we were talking about just a few moments ago on the show with Valerie Amos about the maternity leave, not
Exactly
listening to women's voices.
It is exactly the same, and it is something that exists in most institutions. Is that the tick boxing of putting women in, and lots of people will say, "Oh, you didn't get there on merit if you had to have 50% women." As I said in the meeting, I think I heckled that actually the women in the Labour Party might not be 50%, but we're over 50% of the talent. He's got plenty to pick from. There's plenty of talent in that room, but it's exactly that. It's just putting women in positions won't do it. They have to be imbued with power. Decisions have to be made with women in the room, and those women have to be able to feel that they can speak against the pervading power if that power is a man, and often they don't. Women won't be asking Andy Burnham to give them a job at the moment. There will be some, they will be outliers. What the women in the Parliamentary Labour Party are doing is advocating for other women in the Labour Party, in the Parliamentary Labour Party to get jobs. I have done nothing but advocate for other women to get jobs. And
that's
actually,
not something we men do, actually.
No, it absolutely isn't. Let me invite you behind the curtain. We advocate for other people to get the jobs. Women are much, much, much better at that as a team. However, they're much less good at advocating on their own behalf. And actually, he has to recognise that. And when people are, sycophantically, sucking up to him and saying that they know everything that there is to know about fish. There probably is a woman in a coastal town who probably knows more than that man about fish.
Speaking of a woman in a coastal town, do you share Polly Billington's irritation at the idea of the band getting back together again, the Miliband brothers and all the rest of it?
I mean, not specifically personally on the Miliband brothers, but yes, it doesn't say much for the talent in the Parliamentary Labour Party if, there is this sort of suggestion that you have to be just constantly bringing. I mean, and look, Andy Burnham has been brought in himself, and so look, I have to say where I feel differently to Polly Billington is I absolutely loved the mid-90s, one of the best times of my life. So I would quite like to return to the hope of the mid-90s. But yeah, I'm not going to get involved with who should have which jobs. I think David Miliband would almost certainly be excellent. I think Ed Miliband would be excellent. He's been a brilliant minister in the role that he's had. However, it's not my job to advocate for them. They no doubt are perfectly capable of doing it for themselves.
Well, I think it's time for a nervous, quaking little man to get a word in edgeways. Jess and Bethany, thank you very much indeed.
No worries.
The Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has announced details of a new plan under which members of the public, you and me, rather than judges, will be trained to decide asylum appeals involving human rights and foreign offenders. The new Independent Immigration Appeals Authority is to stop people gaming the system, apparently. It sounds a bit like juries. Is it a good idea? Let's hear now from Fiona Rutherford, the Chief Executive of Justice. Fiona, thanks for joining me. This is quite a radical shift, isn't it, in terms of who gets to stay in this country and who does not, who is believed and who isn't. What's your reaction?
Well, I think, first of all, removing judges from immigration decisions really risks putting the Home Office decisions above the law in cases where children could be separated from their parents, or people could face being returned to a country where they face torture or even death. I guess the question is, do we want to reduce accountability for the department that oversaw the Windrush scandal? And that's really effectively what this is proposing. Home Office decision-making should be improved. I mean, that's what we should be looking at. So that the decisions they're making first time right and accurate place. That's the way to make it more efficient.
I suppose the thinking behind this, I'm just imagining, as it were, is that a lot of the public think that there are a group of liberal judges and lawyers who take decisions that ordinary members of the public wouldn't approve of. And therefore, if you take ordinary members of the public, and as I was saying, we have the jury system after all, then you will get decisions which more reflect public opinion.
And the problem is, this is one of the most complex areas of law. It is more complex than, arguably more complex than criminal law. We know from the Law Commission, who have done a huge amount of work and research, it is highly complex and a very difficult area to interpret. I think the difference with a criminal court setting is that there is a prosecutor in court. Therefore there is a lawyer in court. And what this new proposal from the Home Office today is suggesting could lead us to a position where appeals are being made with absolutely nobody with any legal capability judging or indeed part of the case at all.
That's a very important point, Fiona. You are manfully, womanfully struggling against the wind there, but I think you may be losing. So we'll leave it there. But thank you very, very much indeed for that. Now then, Queen Camilla is facing criticism after welcoming a controversial individual to Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh. We'll find out who in just a few minutes, but the time now, 6:47.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
The long-awaited defence investment plan has been published to much fanfare by Keir Starmer, but no one else. We can see through it, can't we?
Ian Dale at 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
An illegal migrant. Have I got that right, basically?
Yeah, that's basically correct. The right to be a U.S. citizenship if you're born in the United States had been enshrined in the 14th Amendment. It had never really been challenged for decades, essentially. And then President Trump came along and issued an executive order as he started his second term and sought to remove that right. And this ruling that came out today essentially rejected President Trump's claim and said the birthright citizenship stands, and that's a significant blow because the removal of birthright citizenship was kind of core to his anti-immigration drive that has kind of consumed a lot of his second term.
See, I thought he thought as well, that he had shifted the Supreme Court quite clearly in his own direction. So this must be a particular blow to him. How has he reacted?
Well, I mean, he reacted by calling on Congress to pass a law to remove birthright citizenship. He's criticized the court. This comes at the end of a period in which he's had mixed results from the Supreme Court, even though there's a conservative majority there, and 3 out of 9 of the justices were appointed by Trump himself. He suffered a defeat on trade earlier this year when the court struck down his ability to impose tariffs on an emergency basis. He suffered another defeat this week when the court said that he could not fire Lisa Cook, a governor of the Federal Reserve. But he's had some victories as well. And so it's been mixed.
It's been a mix. And James, I just wonder if there is a wider constitutional point here, because obviously there's been an argument going on about voter registration and whether the federal government or the states can control that. And of course, there is the endless rumours about him wanting to stand for a third term, even though that's against the Constitution. Is this a moment where he is bumping up against the clear language of the Constitution in a way that he can't evade?
Well, I mean, he's clearly finding some limits to his powers at the moment. So there are on certain issues, he's not able to go as far as he would like to. And the legal system and the justice system is kind of has created some boundaries for him. Of course, the boundaries that the Supreme Court has created are still much further kind of out and expand his powers more than many would like to see. So, I mean, this is the same court that said, President Trump or any president has absolute immunity for his acts, committed in an official capacity. It's the same court that just ruled that he can fire the heads of the heads and top officials at independent agencies at will, even though the Federal Reserve had a sort of a carve out of sorts, is treated somewhat differently. So he is bumping up against some limits, and I think that's frustrating him.
So fair to say, where you've got to at the moment is a much more powerful presidency, but not an all-powerful presidency.
I think that's a fair way to put it.
All right, James Politi, thank you very, very much indeed for talking to LBC. Now, today, the Royals' social media account posted a picture of Queen Camilla with J.K. Rowling, one of the more controversial figures in the gender wars argument, which is already gathering some backlash. Is this a royal endorsement of her views? Alexander Larman, the author of The Windsors at War, joins me now. Alexander, thanks for joining us. So, first of all, J.K. Rowling, obviously Queen Camilla knows perfectly well that if she's invited and they're seen together, there is going to be an online backlash.
Yes, Sandra, I think it's fair to say that this would have been anticipated, because bear in mind that the royal family don't put that many things on their social media. It's not like they're doing constant updates. It tends to be things that are thought to be consequential. And so this can be seen, I think it's fair to say, as a tacit endorsement by Queen Camilla herself and then by the wider royal family of J.K. Rowling, and it can be seen as an endorsement of her as a writer, which is obviously how it would like to be seen. But the other thing is, it will be seen in many quarters as an endorsement of her gender-critical views. And that is a situation which I think is less febrile than it was a few years ago, but it's still controversial.
It's still pretty controversial, still pretty febrile right now. That is an unusually political act, you might say, from a senior member of the royal family.
Yes, I mean, it's not the sort of thing you would usually expect to see. I mean, it seems strange we are referring to the Britain's best-selling author as somebody who's controversial. I mean, that's especially what you're about to say, Abu Hamza or someone like that. But I think instead we are in a situation where Rowling is somebody who expresses her views with a certain degree of fervour, especially online, and she gets a lot of criticism for it. So the fact that the Queen is literally being photographed standing shoulder by shoulder with her, that will not be liked in a lot of areas.
And we should say that Camilla has spent an awful lot of time promoting reading, and particularly promoting reading among young people, most of whom read Harry Potter, so it's not terribly surprising in that regard.
No, and I'm sure that there is a large part of the Queen who would like this to be seen as a literary thing rather than a political thing. But obviously, anything that the royal family does is going to be scrutinised from every perspective imaginable. But I cannot believe that Camilla looks at Rowling and thinks, oh, I despise everything you stand for, I'll be photographed next to you, with absolute horror. I suspect she has a great deal of sympathy with much of what she says. I mean, it's very unlikely she would ever say anything public, but make of the standing shoulder by shoulder what you will is what I would say to that.
And there is a generational aspect to it, and possibly even a class aspect to this as well.
Yes, I think that's fair to say that many people, it tends to be younger people who get quite riled about these things, whereas a lot of older, perhaps more conservative people look at what Rowling's saying and do not see it as controversial, and they don't see that what she is saying is in any sense wrong, or in any sense even something we should be getting so het up about. And the fact that there are going to be people deeply offended by this who will be complaining vociferously about the royal family and about Camilla herself. But they would have known what they were doing. They would have known this is going to be controversial.
Yeah. Alexander, just let me ask you a little bit more about Queen Camilla as she's evolving as a national figure, because in a sense she seems to me to be playing a little bit of the same role as the late Queen Mother did, maybe 10 years or 15 years ago, in the sense she is the one winking at the public. She's got, there might be a cigarette, there might be a glass of something to one hand, and she is very much who she is. She knows who she is, and she doesn't always play the obvious game.
Well, Andrew, when it comes to controversial views, the late Queen Mother was somebody who had political views which were somewhat to the right of most people in this country. But yes, I think that I take your point. Camilla is somebody who she's popular. She likes a drink. She likes a giggle. She's a big fan of Jilly Cooper. And of course, the fact that she's seen as very accessible, as somebody who has softened and humanised Charles. And I think that most people feel very fondly towards her. And I don't think this is going to do her any damage or any harm whatsoever, because the kind of people who will be criticising her, people who hate the royal family anyway and hate its proponents. So I don't actually think it's going to be damaging.
And before the king became the king, there was an awful lot of comment about how he was going to be very, very political. I may have contributed to it myself. I think all the famous black spider letters and the advice given to ministers and the rest of it. How would he cope as king? There's been almost no sign of that. But would you say that the monarchy is in any sense becoming more political in this period?
I think his speech to Congress was very political, actually. I think what he's been doing is he's been doing political things, but in a lower key than might have been expected, because he's a very smart man. He's a very good public speaker. And quite often what he's done is he's given these speeches, and at first they seem almost innocuous. And then you start putting two and two together, you're looking for the lacunae and so forth. And actually, I think he's been the most political monarch we can remember in modern times. I just think he's chosen so far not to express any opinion on British politics. And when Andy Burnham becomes Prime Minister, that might get quite interesting. Actually.
Very, very interesting indeed. And of course, he uses humour very cleverly as well. Alexander Larman, thank you so much for that. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can also stay up to date with all the latest news and videos and opinion. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now.